In June, Stripe pointed an AI model at a 50 million line Ruby codebase and asked it to do a migration their engineers had scoped at 2 months for an entire team. It finished in 1 day. The model was Claude Fable 5, and it's the first time Anthropic has shipped something from a tier they had been keeping locked away from the public. This is what Mythos-Class actually means, what the benchmarks really say, and the one caveat buried in the fine print that you should know about before you switch. Some quick context, because Anthropic's lineup has changed a lot in 4 weeks. Until June, the ladder was simple. Haiku for cheap and fast, Sonnet for everyday work, Opus as the flagship. Opus 4.8 sat at the top, and that was the ceiling you could buy. Then on June 9th, Fable 5 landed above it, the first member of the Claude 5 family. 3 weeks later, Anthropic launched Sonnet 5 and made it the free default for every Claude user on July 1st. So in less than a month, the entire ladder shifted up a rung, and the interesting question became what exactly is sitting on that new top rung. Here's the part most coverage glosses over. Fable 5 and Claude Mythos 5 are the same model, same weights, same brain. The difference is packaging. And the reason this tier stayed locked away until now is blunt: security. The raw model is capable enough in domains like offensive cybersecurity and biology that Anthropic wasn't willing to hand it out. Mythos 5 still only goes to vetted partners in those fields, with certain safeguards lifted. Fable 5 is the version the rest of us get, wrapped in additional safety measures. So when Anthropic says Mythos-Class, they're not being poetic. There is now a named capability tier that was previously considered too dangerous to release, and for the first time the public gets direct access to it, guardrails included. That's a real shift in how frontier labs ship their best models. Now the numbers, because they're genuinely unusual. On SWE-bench Pro, which tests real software engineering against real repositories, Fable 5 scores 80.3%. GPT 5.5 scores 58.6. That's not a photo finish. That's a 22-point gap on the benchmark that matters most for working developers. Spatial reasoning nearly tripled versus Opus 4.8. On Anthropic's own long-running task benchmark, it's the first model to break 90%, a 10-point jump over Opus. The one place the race stays tight is agent harnesses. On Terminal Bench, Codex running GPT 5.5 edges out Claude Code with Fable 5 by 0.3 of a point. So the raw model gap is wide, but tooling still levels things at the margin. What does an 80% SWE-bench Pro score feel like in practice? The pattern in developer reports is remarkably consistent. On hard problems, multi-file refactors, agent sessions that run for hours, building a working front-end from a single screenshot, the praise is nearly unanimous. Andre Karpathy called it a major version bump-deserving step change forward, and his emphasis was on long problem-solving sessions on genuinely difficult problems. But on ordinary tasks, quick scripts, small fixes, boilerplate, the enthusiasm cools fast, and the complaint threads fill up with people asking why they're paying flagship prices for work Sonnet handles fine. The step change shows up when the problem is actually difficult, not when you're renaming variables. One spec deserves its own moment. The context window is 1 million tokens. That's roughly 700,000 words of working memory, entire codebases, months of documents, held in a single session. Combine that with the long task benchmark score, and you get the actual pitch of this model. It isn't answering questions slightly better. It's holding an enormous problem in its head for hours without losing the plot. That's the capability the Stripe migration story is really about. Here's the IPI surface. Model ID Claude Fable 5, available on the Claude IPI Bedrock and Vertex. The pricing is where your eyebrows go up: $10 per million input tokens, $50 per million output. For comparison, that's premium even by flagship standards. But two things soften it. Prompt caching cuts input costs by 90% when you're reusing context, which in agent workflows is most of the time. and a heavy agent session that chews through 2 million input tokens and produces 200,000 output lands around $30 uncached, closer to 12 with caching. If that session replaces a day of engineering time, the math isn't hard. Zoom out for a second because the timing isn't an accident. Gartner projects AI agent software spending to hit $206 billion in 2026, more than double last year. 65% of working engineers now run 2 coding agents daily, not 1. This is the market Fable 5 was priced for. The bet is that when agents do multi-hour autonomous work, companies stop comparing models on price per token and start comparing them on price per completed job. Every design decision in this model, the giant context, the long task focus, the premium pricing, makes sense through that lens and almost no other. Now the caveat, and it follows directly from why this model was held back. Fable 5 ships with always-on classifiers watching for misuse in 3 areas: cybersecurity, biology and chemistry, and model distillation. When one triggers, your request gets handed off to Opus 4.8 mid-conversation, and you're told it happened. It's worth comparing that to how every previous frontier model handled a risky-looking request: a flat refusal, full stop. Under the old approach, a false positive meant a dead end. Under this one, you still get an answer from what was the best model on the market a month ago, and you don't pay Fable prices for the rerouted request. That's the genuine upside of the design. The downside is real too. Anthropic's figures put triggers well under 5% of sessions, but early users hit false positives on completely legitimate work: medical imaging code, lab automation, even music firmware. And some people just don't love a model swap happening mid-conversation, however politely it's disclosed. If you work in those domains, the babysitter is going to introduce itself to you at some point. Whether that trade is worth frontier access is the real question, and I think the answer depends entirely on what you work on. Full disclosure on where I stand. My hands-on time with Fable 5 so far is exactly 1 working session, and it happened to be the model building an entire video production pipeline for me, end to end, in an afternoon. 1 data point, but it's the kind that sticks with you. On the bigger question, I do buy the tier above Opus framing, and here's the test I'd offer you for any launch like this. Marketing can buy you impressive numbers on a company's own benchmarks, so discount those. What marketing can't easily buy is independent benchmarks agreeing with each other, a 22-point gap over your rival on neutral ground, and companies like Stripe putting their name on production results in public. Ignore the adjectives, count the independent receipts. Right now, the receipts are stacking up on the side of actually better. So who should actually move? If your work is hard enough to feel the difference, long agent runs, gnarly refactors, million-token codebases, Fable 5 is the strongest tool you can currently rent, and the pricing math can still work out because it finishes jobs in fewer attempts. If your workload is routine, Sonnet 5 just became the free default for every Claude user and lands close to Opus on most everyday tasks, at introductory pricing through August. Paying Mythos-Class prices to fix typos is how you end up in the cost complaints thread. The first Mythos-Class model in public hands is a milestone regardless of which side of the hype you land on. Whether it's worth $10 a megatoken is a question about your problems, not the model. I'll be testing it against GPT 5.5 on identical real-world tickets in the next video. Subscribe if you want the receipts.